Good morning and welcome to TVP World News. I'm your host, Diana Skaya. And we begin with breaking news this morning. A ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah has come into effect. Now, the agreement ends nearly 14 months of conflict between the two sides in Lebanon. Now, the ceasefire began at 4 a.m. Israeli time on Wednesday, following an announcement by Israel, France, and the United States the previous evening. Now, U.S. President Joe Biden described the agreement as a permanent cessation of hostilities. Now, despite the truce, both sides engaged in attacks up until shortly before the ceasefire took effect. Now, after the pact was formalized, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned that Israel would respond decisively if Hezbollah violates any part of the agreement.
I just spoke with the Prime Minister of Israel and Lebanon. I'm pleased to announce that their governments have accepted the United States proposal to end the devastating conflict between Israel and Hezbollah. I want to thank President Macron of France for his partnership in reaching this moment. The United States remains prepared to conclude a set of historic deals with Saudi Arabia, to include a security pact and economic assurances, together with a credible pathway for establishing a Palestinian state and the full normalization of relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel.
Staying on Israel, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu delivered a special televised address to the nation on Tuesday evening. Now, in his remarks, Netanyahu focused on the conflict between Israel and Lebanon, highlighting the recent brokered ceasefire. Now, the Israeli Prime Minister described the recent ceasefire agreement as a significant victory for Israel, and he asserted that his country's military operations are reshaping the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East.
Hezbollah decided to attack us from Lebanon on October 8th. A year later, it is not the same Hezbollah. We have set it back decades. We eliminated Hassan Nasrallah, the axis of the axis. We eliminated its top leaders, destroyed most of its rockets and missiles. We killed thousands of terrorists, and we demolished their underground terror infrastructure alongside our border, infrastructure they had been building for years. In the past year, we turned the tables. We were attacked from 7 fronts, and we fought back with might. We are changing the face of the Middle East.
A 2-day Nordic-Baltic summit will begin on Wednesday in Harpsund, Sweden. Now, heads of government from the Nordic and Baltic countries, including Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, will attend the gathering. Now, transatlantic relations and regional security in the Baltic Sea region will be at the top of the agenda. Now, the leaders will also discuss continued long-term support for Ukraine. A press conference with the heads of government will be held shortly after the meeting. Prime Minister Tusk will hold bilateral talks with his Swedish counterpart Ulf Kristersson on the second day of the summit. Now, during their meeting, they will sign a new strategic partnership agreement between Sweden and Poland. The European Parliament is set to vote on Ursula von der Leyen's new commission just 4 days before the start of her second term. Now, the incoming team, made up of 26 commissioners, requires an absolute majority to be approved. Now, von der Leyen's incoming commission is shaping up to be more diverse than its previous iteration. EPP leader Manfred Weber has hinted at a broader coalition, which also includes the likes of the Greens and the centrists and reformists. Nevertheless, von der Leyen emphasized collaboration with pro-EU and pro-Ukraine forces. Now, some MEPs have already announced a lack of support for the new commission, with the most divisive topics focusing on migration, environmental issues, as well as the EU's transition to green energy. U.S. President Joe Biden could procure another several $billion worth in military assistance for Ukraine before leaving the White House. Now, the current administration is working to secure an aid package which will also help replenish U.S. stocks of military hardware and ammunition. Now, out of the $24 billion total, $8 billion is earmarked to finance U.S. companies' contracts to supply arms to Ukraine. Another $16 billion will be used to replenish Washington's military arsenal. These moves come just days after Biden submitted to Congress a statement of intent to cancel half of Ukraine's economic aid debt, a sum over $4.5 billion. Now, the current administration is working to ramp up support for Ukraine ahead of an unsure period when President-elect Donald Trump is expected to take over in January. For long months, the Kharkiv region has been facing daily terror from Russian forces, with the city of Kupiansk caught in the crossfire. So far, Ukrainian defenders have been successfully repelling assault after assault to defend the fortified stronghold standing firm on the Russian path towards Kharkiv city.
From May 2024, as many as 22,000 people have been evacuated from the dangerous areas of Kharkiv. And ever since, cities such as Kupiansk have turned into sprawls of lifeless concrete buildings, constantly targeted by the Russians.
You see what they're doing. They're destroying everything there, not stopping whether it's day or night. This is the Oskil. It has spread a bit because its banks were blown up, but it is an obstacle for them now.
Oskil, the river that Commander Dmytro was just pointing at, has been vital for Ukraine.
They want to cross to the right bank and take control of the Kupiansk-Kharkiv direction.
The Russians have crossed the Oskil once before. Kupiansk was captured early in the war and then liberated by Ukrainian forces in the famous Kharkiv offensive in autumn of 2022. Since then, artillery and drones built locally or sent by allies have been crucial for blocking Russia's major attempts at advancing.
The enemy's armored vehicles have not been in use much, as their recent unsuccessful assaults have proven that this approach doesn't work. Vehicles can also be destroyed at longer range, and if they reach the first line, they are destroyed by artillery and our drone systems.
However, Russia is also relying on more old-school methods.
The mode of the assaults has now shifted more toward infantry, concentrating troops and then storming with smaller units.
Assaults using solely infantry are mostly costly for the Russians, but they also take their toll on the Ukrainians.
It has always been tough here, and about a month ago they started pressing us more. They flanked us on the right and are constantly pressuring us. It can't be said that it ever got worse, because the pressure has always been constant.
Is the fatigue starting to show?
Yes, the fatigue is really starting to show. There's mental exhaustion and a slight decline in strength, both physically and psychologically.
Ukraine's membership in NATO is the only way to force Russia to lay down its weapons. This is what Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andrzej Sybiha said during talks with his Polish counterpart Radosław Sikorski in Warsaw. Our Katarzyna Nowicka has this report.
Nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. That was one of the main points of the talks between Andrzej Sybiha, the Ukrainian foreign minister, and Poland's foreign minister, Radosław Sikorski. The two emphasized that, especially after 1,000 days of the war had already taken place, and the incoming presidency of Donald Trump, which is also making the security situation quite shaky and future aid to Ukraine uncertain. The two stressed that all of these discussions that are taking place must also be attended by Ukraine. This is Sikorski's stance, of course. And they also commented on a recent report published by Le Monde, stressing that France and the United Kingdom were once again reigniting talks on possibly sending a military coalition to Ukraine.
The French president's ideas that France might take part in some kind of action on Ukrainian territory have been presented to the public. I have no source knowledge of the French-British talks, and I don't want to rely on press speculation, but I appreciate the idea that it should be Vladimir Putin who worries about what we are doing.
There can be no limit to the support for Ukraine, which is fighting a brutal aggressor. The priority must be the delivery of weapons right now, by the end of the year. We have a good dialogue with the United States.
The two also discussed the possibility of quick EU accession by Ukraine come 2025 when Poland takes the rotating presidency of the European Council. The two stressed that this would definitely be very important and a huge step for Ukraine, but the foreign minister Sybiha also stressed that it's NATO membership that would be that final nail in the coffin that would push Russia and Putin to the negotiating table to finally sign a truce. For TVP World, Katarzyna Nowicka.
Warsaw and Kiev are also working out the details of a new agreement for Polish state institutions and private organizations to carry out exhumation work on victims of the Volhynia massacre. Stay tuned for more on the topic at 9:45 Central European Time in World Talks with Józef Hrabina. Several British air bases hosting U.S. Air Force assets have yet again spotted suspicious drones near their airspace. Now, while Pentagon spokesperson Major General Patrick Ryder has reassured the public that the incursions have not disrupted operations at any of the facilities, while the incidents are being investigated to rule out major threats.
Installation leaders have determined so far that none of these incursions impact the base residents, the facilities, or the assets that we have on those bases. We're, of course, continuing to work with host nation authorities and our mission partners to ensure the safety of our personnel, our facilities, and the equipment. The bottom line is it's something that we're going to take seriously. We're continuing to look into it, but as of right now has not had any significant mission impact. Small UASs, drones, have become something that's, relatively common now across the landscape. It's something that the department has been looking closely at in terms of how it applies to our facilities, our personnel, whether it's in combat zones or outside of combat zones. But in terms of these particular incidents in the UK versus the ones in the States, again, I don't want to speculate that there's any connection.
And moving on now to Lithuania, where the Lithuanian General Prosecutor's Office is leading one of two investigations into the DHL cargo plane crash near Vilnius Airport. Now, the aircraft's flight data recorders have been found and will be examined. No evidence of terrorism or sabotage has been found so far. The cause of the crash may be technical malfunctions or pilot error. The plane crashed on approach to Vilnius Airport early Monday, killing one person on board.
The plane did not fall from the sky. It did not fall directly down. It's obvious that such a situation indicates that maybe some accepting technical possibilities were wrong. Maybe some technical problems or interference were in the aircraft. Maybe some neglect. But this is a research hypothesis that allows us to get direction for the investigation, which needs to be investigated. The objective signs, which we have determined so far, allow us to investigate in the direction that we do. If we determine some objective data which allows us to continue on another path, we will do so. At the moment, we cannot talk in assumptions.
Tuesday evening protests in Albania were met with a strong response from the police, with officers using tear gas and water cannons to disperse the crowds. Now, hundreds of opposition protesters took to the streets accusing the government of corruption. Demonstrators in Tirana demanded the current government to be replaced with a technocratic caretaker administration. Now, the protesters said they were engaged in a campaign of civil disobedience against Prime Minister Edi Rama. Opposition figures in Albania have been protesting nearly every week, demanding a caretaker government to step in until the parliamentary elections in 2025. Leaders of Albania's two major opposition parties, Sali Berisha and Ilir Meta, have been indicted on corruption charges. However, both deny those accusations. The two officials from the Democratic Party and Freedom Party, respectively, say the charges have been orchestrated by Prime Minister Edi Rama. Now, in response, Rama said the indictments were not politically motivated and accused the opposition of attempting to seize power by force. Polish football star Robert Lewandowski has just crossed off a major milestone, surpassing 100 goals in the Champions League. After last night's game against Brest, Lewandowski has 101 goals in 125 games for Borussia Dortmund, Bayern Munich, and now FC Barcelona. Now, Lewandowski's major achievement puts him in elite company alongside Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi, who boast 141 and 129 goals respectively in the Champions League. At the same time, he became the second quickest player to reach 100. It took Messi just 123 games to mark the same achievement. Now, last night's victory lifted Barcelona to second place in the 36-team league, 1 point behind Inter Milan and level with third-place Liverpool, who host Real Madrid on Wednesday. Brest dropped to 9th spot with 10 points. And that's all for this morning's edition of TVP World News. I'm Diana Skaya. Don't go away. Interviews up next.